Oh, thanks. So my name's Tahir, Latif. I'm a group president in the Public and Commercial Services Union, PCS. And I should say, forgive me if I refer to my notes here. First I really need to get some excuses in because I'm completely non-technical minded, so I've absolutely no idea about technology and stuff like that. What I have done is, as a president in the aviation group of PCS, it's an industry that's obviously being seeing rapid advances in technology, which threaten to sweep away large chunks of the workforce because of the nature of that technology, and that's kind of just got me thinking a little bit about stuff and how it relates to workers and what we can do instead of what we're seeing at the moment, basically. So I'll come to aviation in a minute. I mean, forgive me for being really simplistic here, because this is kind of how I think. The thing that really got me thinking about this is a simple example from everyday life, which is about automatic checkout tools. I mean, it's kind of vexed me and got me thinking about stuff, and then I thought, well, can I relate that to other things? So obviously, I mean, it's not saying anything particularly revealing to say, well, why we've got automated checkout tools in supermarkets and lots of other shops. It's because to reduce costs, get rid of staff, and increase profit margins in the face of the threat of online shopping. So we kind of all know that's true, and for me personally, I tend to prefer to wait a few extra minutes for a cashier to become free, or they open up another till or something, just a kind of silent protest, But in the back of my mind is the idea that if everybody did that, then you would kind of force these companies to employ more people. And I mean, if you think about it, how widespread that is, then every shop that has automated checkouts, if they all took on one extra person to staff a till, that's like thousands of jobs you've created there. And so, those thousands of jobs, reduction in unemployment, income for those individuals, they actually pay tax, less tax burden on all those sorts of things. And you think, well, that seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? So that the other thing about them, I don't want to go on too long about that sort of subjects, but the other thing is, it got me thinking about how we can actually use technology, how technological development should be something, or could be something that we're excited about as offering an opportunity to make a better society. I mean, the things that I've said about checkout tools, for example, it's all based on the idea that it's a good idea to create thousands of jobs on checkout tools for young people, say. I mean, for me, that's a kind of measure of the failure of capitalism, really, that we're actually fighting for people to get jobs on checkout tools because otherwise they're consigned to the kind of scrap heap of unemployment. So, I mean, in reality, it's a pretty mundane type of job. I mean, it doesn't contribute hugely to things of social value, I would argue. A lot of those jobs are filled by young people who are in education en route. They hope to something better, or we're basically fighting for scraps in effect by saying we're really pleased that we've created more jobs in supermarkets and things. Actually, what we should be doing is actually welcoming the idea that we can automate tills, because we can then use those people for something a bit more valuable. They could, I mean, it's all joined up, because you are talking about training, education, all the things that would then lead to that. But actually, if our mundane jobs are kind of are automated, then we should be looking at it as freeing up our resource to educate people, train them, get them doing things that will take our society into the future. I'll come back to what kind of jobs I'm thinking of shortly, but I mean, there's a couple of basic principles come out of that. One is that current situation, which is ideologically driven, corporations in competition with each other, seeing technology just as a way of reducing cost and increasing profit, throwing people on the scrap heap. To me, that's just hopelessly wasteful, inefficient and inhumane, basically. I think we need to strive for a world where technology actually helps us by relieving us of those mundane tasks and allowing us to do jobs that are more socially useful and personally satisfying. I mean, that's kind of more where I'd want to be. Let me tell you a little bit about aviation. It's the industry I work in. It's an area where technology is highly contentious, and it's also it needs to be got right, because there are people's lives at risk. I mean, it's not the only industry like that, but you can imagine. So I'll tell you a little bit about technology and aviation, but I won't dwell on some of the small, incredibly tedious stuff that won't mean anything to anyone. I'll just mention a couple of things that are kind of more interest or relevance to the person on the street, namely the automation of air traffic control and also of pilots in aircraft. You can imagine both of those are highly reliant on technology already, you know, radar, satellite navigation, safety alerting, stuff like that. But of course, the thing we do know about aviation is, and that's what I was saying about the airlines to you earlier, Dave, is that it's one of the most ruthlessly profiteering industries there is, and anyone who's tried the lottery of buying airline tickets will know this. Try to squeeze every penny out of you, and there's constant pressure on the people who run aviation, by which I mean the airports and air traffic control, as opposed to the airlines, so the commercial businesses. There's constant pressure to reduce costs, and of course the way to do that is to reduce staff, because that's your biggest cost, and it's a highly skilled workforce, so it costs quite a lot. So your Ryanairs of the world are really keen to see the numbers of controllers slashed, because they see them as an incredibly expensive overhead that they don't want to pay for. So no one's suggesting that we take humans out of the equation when it comes to aviation, but if you take the area I work in, air traffic control, I'm not a controller, I just do research and stuff in aviation, but the desire to remove humans from air traffic control is leading to a situation or a concept where you have this kind of systems managed airspace, and controllers sit back and are kind of passive and don't only intervene in the kind of machine oriented exchanges when there's some sort of problem, like, you know, separation between aircraft looks like it's a bit dodgy or something like that. The idea is that if you have that kind of passive controller, then instead of having lots of controllers controlling little chunks of airspace, you can have far fewer. You can sweep away a lot of the workforce, because they'll all have much bigger geographical areas. Give you an idea of what that means. So across Europe there are currently 66 air traffic control centres. Air traffic control, those are the things that control aircraft in between airports, you know, through the sky. There are 66 of those across Europe at the moment. 2 of them are in the UK, in Swanwick and Prestwick, and the intention by the kind of joint European initiative here for automating air traffic control is to reduce that 66 down to 10. So that would completely decimate the workforce right across Europe, basically, depending on where those 10 were situated. For airports, the thing is what at the moment is what we call remote towers, and this is taking away the sort of traditional control tower building that you see at airports, and having all control of flights in and out of airports taking place in a secluded room that could be situated anywhere, basically, and you use kind of virtual imaging and tracking systems to do it from somewhere completely removed from the airport itself. Now, those rooms can control operations at quite a few airports simultaneously, so you've got all these logistical and you know, staff costs, and the numbers of staff required is slashed and that sort of thing. So again, it's a big threat to jobs in that sense. And I was at a meeting recently where a Norwegian guy said to me, you know what, you could close all your airfield operations in Scotland, because we can do it from a room in Norway right now, and they can. The technology is there for them to do that. In terms of aircraft, of course, there's a lot of talk about pilotless planes, and they want to get to a position where pilots are kind of taking the same sort of passive role as a controller, where the systems do the work on the plane and they only intervene when there's some sort of issue, and that way you don't have to have as many people on the plane. You can save on staff costs. Ryanair can get rid of half their pilots, that sort of thing. And the other aspect is the advent of drones. We all hear about drones encroaching on passenger flights that happen to be passing, that kind of thing. And it's had to come under some sort of regulation. There's a whole new class of airspace about drones at the moment. But the real issue about drones, I think, is that there's talk about, well, if you can have a drone and you can make it fly and it can do a job and it's subject to regulation, then why don't we just make them bigger and bigger until you can have them big enough to get people on and freight on anyway? So you kind of achieve the pilotless aircraft by kind of extension of kind of drone thinking, for want of a better phrase. So for workers in the aviation industries, and I'm sure this parallels other industries as well, I mean, this is all pretty scary stuff, and the most pessimistic see it as the writing on the wall for a workforce that is highly skilled and highly unionised. The employer wants to be rid of a lot of those skills and those people because of the expense and the pressure from airlines to cut costs. But actually, of course, at the moment we're also seeing that there's huge increases planned in air traffic, and that brings with it lots of concerns with the public about safety and about the environmental impacts. So in our view, and the view of PCS, we should be actually using those skills instead of allowing them to walk out the door, using them to research and plan and monitor the flights so that you can achieve better environmental impacts and assure safety and things like that. Instead, you've got commercial imperatives of reducing staff costs first. I'm struggling just to provide the number of controllers to control flights through the UK airspace, let alone doing all the work that's needed on safety and on things like air quality and carbon emissions and aircraft noise. So as with the cash till worker that I was talking about earlier, a skilled air traffic controller and engineer, they're also thrown on the scrap heap by not so much by the technology per se, but by the segmented, competitive, profit-making nature of the industry. So with all that thinking in mind, I wrote and passed a motion at the PCS conference this year, which forms part of our policy towards technology. In fact, I think it is our technological policy at the moment. And the motion states, we need to devise a strategy along the lines of the groundbreaking 1970s Lucas plan for dealing with automation and robotisation that counters simple cost efficiency argument with a plan that benefits our members, workers and society generally. It sets out a short programme of action just for the initial stages. Understand the full extent of the potential for automation to replace people's work, produce explanatory material, make the arguments clear to members, condemn the use of automation solely for cost efficiency purposes and express support for resistance to such developments. We're thinking there of, for example, Southern Rail and the rail workers. Campaign for the beneficial use of automation and artificial intelligence to liberate people from drudgery and to restore public services lost to cuts. So I'll come back to that point in a second. And demand that the labour-saving potential of new technology is used to free up workers to make a just transition to much-needed climate jobs. So underpinning that idea is something that I'd kind of everything that I'd read about automation and the idea that the amount of work was going to shrink seemed to be predicated on what I thought was a mistaken assumption, namely that. And I am kind of simplifying what authors and other people have been saying about this, but it's the idea that the world of work that we have now, if you sum all the work that we have, let's just say in the UK at the moment, that's it. It's a fixed concept and it's not going to change. Then automation is going to come along and sweep away some of that work, thus leaving less for people to do. I mean that sort of fixed concept of what work is what drives the kind of the full automation, shorter working hours, basic income type of thinking. But the fact is that the work we do at the moment is not all the work that there is to do. It's the work that market forces have decided we can afford to do and we can pay for, which is a very different thing. And because we're trying to squeeze profit out of this box of work, it's constantly got that pressure to make it smaller. So for me, I think we shouldn't be accepting the proposition that automation threatens work, because that buys into an agenda that says the work we do now is the work we need. And that's even leaving aside the idea of unpaid work in the domestic sphere, for example. What we really need to argue for is that automation, if automation does soak up a lot of work in this kind of work box, then we need to make a bigger box. And if automation can do some of that, then we make a bigger box and a bigger one. And eventually we end up with a box that's a completely different shape, underpinned by ultimately work by technology that is doing some of the work, but that the area covered by the work done by human beings is at least as big as, if not bigger than, it was previously. So, in that sense, creating more work than there is at the moment. So I guess the question there then is, well, what kind of work am I talking about? What is this extra stuff that we're not doing at the moment? I mean, probably too long a list to go into, really, but I can think of two things that kind of formed the basis of the conference motion that we passed. One is about restoring cuts to public services, and I mean we know that 7 years of the government's austerity agenda has slashed services to the bone, and their ideological commitment is anyway to reducing the public sphere. Everything's been reduced to a minimum. Sorry, were you about to say something?
No, I'm just saying if you could finish up.
Oh, sure, yeah. Time does fly. Yeah. Okay. So, restoring public services is one. The other one, then, to be brief, is combating climate change. All the stuff associated with carbon emissions and air quality. The amount of work needed to put that right, greening the transport system, transforming the energy system, restoring habitats and ecosystems, can't be underestimated how much work there is there. And that, to me, seems like a much more constructive utilisation of our resources than just simply saying, well, people are unemployed. So I will finish here on this point, that in order to do that, it's not going to happen with the current government, let's face it. I mean, they're so far from that kind of agenda that it's kind of untrue, or any kind of agenda as things are at the moment. We do need a different kind of government, one that's willing to pick up the ideas of, say, the Lucas Plan, for example, and to view workers and technology as resources that we can set to work in building a better world and making a bigger box of work. I'll finish there then, if that's okay. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thank you.